Hi everyone, Kim here at Olive City Oasis in Northern California, Zone 9B. And in today's video, I'm going to share with you all about rhubarb. I'm going to do my last harvest of the season and show you some ways you can preserve it. Plus, if you stick around to the end of the video, well, I might show you how to make this amazing rhubarb sauce. I could not wait to try it. Oh my gosh, you guys, so good. And this sauce is really, really easy to make. 3 ingredients only: rhubarb, water, and sugar. Now we have cooled off a little this week. It was 112 last week. Today it only got up to 101. Plus, I just found a spot in the shade this evening. It's perfect for me to sit down and enjoy this little treat. So come with me and let's talk all about rhubarb. Well, it's time to do my pretty much last rhubarb harvest of the season. I might do one more, say, in August, but what happens is throughout the summer, your rhubarb is going to get more and more fibrous. So that is one reason why you want to do your final harvest at the end of June, or, as I am, in the first part of July. Now, if these look a little sparse to you, that's because about a week ago, I did a big rhubarb harvest because I saw that the heat was going to hit us full force the next day. We're talking 110 degrees Fahrenheit and higher. So yeah, I did a big harvest, and I've got those rhubarb frozen and ready for me to cook with whenever I would like. Freezing is the way I do preserve most of my rhubarb, although there are a few other ways to do it, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. You know, these are all kind of short. I'm gonna just leave those. Yeah, I'm not gonna harvest any of those. Now, the other reason that you want to be harvesting at the end of June, beginning of July, is because rhubarb needs plenty of time to gather and store energy in its stalks throughout the rest of the summer and fall. Now, if you live in a really warm area like me, your rhubarb will probably start producing really well again in the fall, and you can have some more harvesting if you'd like, if your plants are really well established. But in general, the plants need the rest of this time throughout the hot summer and in through the fall to gather their energy so they can grow stronger and healthier the next year. So basically, you would just let the plant continue to grow, and if you see any flower stalks coming up, you definitely cut those off before they go to seed, because you don't want the plants wasting their energy on creating seeds. You want them putting all the energy into their root system. Now, if you're not aware, if you've never harvested rhubarb before, the way to do it is to take it, twist it, and pull. You do not want to cut rhubarb stalks, because if you cut them, you will be exposing the plant at the cut line to bacteria, and that is not something you want to do. So you just simply twist and pull. It's very simple and will usually come right away. Oh, that took a baby one with it. Oh well. See how easily they break off when they're ready? And how do you know when they're ready? Well, not by their color. For instance, this is a Victoria rhubarb, and it does not turn red. It stays green. You know by the length. In general, a fully mature rhubarb stalk is between 10 and 12 inches long. And I'll share with you a secret. I have harvested them shorter than that, but I wouldn't go lower than 8 inches. All right, that's all that's left on that plant. 3 stalks and the crown. By the way, with rhubarb, you don't want to have the crown buried. You want it exposed somewhat. Otherwise, it might rot. Whoops, broke one off, but it doesn't matter. It's going to be sending out a lot of new growth very soon, which we will leave to gather energy. Those two grew a bit differently, being up in the raised bed, And these down in the more clay soil had a harder time. They're in more sun, and they were kind of disrupted or bothered when we put in the fence here for the chickens. But I harvested a ton of stalks a few days ago, as I said. Now again, if you haven't grown rhubarb before and you're wondering where does it grows commonly and best in zones 4 to 8. However, it can be stretched to zones 3 and zone 9. In fact, I'm in zone 9B. And it just requires, say in the hotter areas like mine, putting it in a spot where it gets partial sun, partial shade all throughout the day, because it can't handle the intense heat all summer long. No way. And then if you're in a colder area, that's going to require you to do a really deep mulch in the winter. But it can be done. And I think these are going to do great gathering strength over the rest of the summer. I just need to keep them well watered in this heat. And I've got all these rhubarb stalks to make wonderful, delicious desserts from. Mostly I use them for pie, but I also use a lot for jam and for drinks and a little bit for syrup. Now, the first thing you want to do after you harvest your stalks is cut off the leaves, because the leaves are poisonous. They're poisonous to really everything. So you want to compost them down deep and keep them away from all animals. Now, one of the myths about rhubarb that I've heard is that it becomes toxic, the stalks do, later in the summer. That's not true. Not at all. It's transferring energy from the sun through the leaves down into the root system, but it's not transferring the toxicity of the leaves into the stalks and the roots. So rest assured, you don't have to worry about that. In fact, you can even take a summer harvest, even though I said to do your last harvest at the end of June or into the beginning of July. You can do one more harvest if you have just a bumper crop growing, say in mid to end of August. Just be prepared. The stalks might be kind of tough and fibrous, but if you peel off the outer layer, though that does peel off any color, and you cook it down in a pie, you're not going to notice that probably. Just leave plenty of stalks and leaves to continue to gather energy. But yes, it's amazing what this simple looking stalk with its poisonous leaf is going to turn into if you love sour tasting fruit, especially if you mix it with, say, strawberries. Well, you won't be disappointed with rhubarb. Now let's go discuss a few ways we can preserve the rhubarb. Freezing, yes, but what else? And maybe I'll share a recipe with you too. So there are several easy ways you can preserve rhubarb, but all of them start with the same steps. You're going to want to rinse off all of your stalks, making sure you have cut off the ends on both sides. Then you're going to want to cut the stalks in 1/2-inch pieces. So as you can see, not all of the rhubarb is the Victoria rhubarb that is green. I do have some rhubarb that is red. I'm not sure of the variety, it slipped my mind, but I'll look it up and put it on the screen for you. What I like to do when I preserve and cook with rhubarb is mix the two varieties together, and that way I get a blend of the tastes, which are very similar, but also a blend of the color, because just look at that red. It makes it really, really beautiful. The green rhubarb is a little hardier and a little more dependable and productive, but the red adds such a lovely color that I have to grow some of it too. And again, when you're cutting, you want to do 1/2-inch segments, give or take. And if you get any stringiness coming off, don't worry about that. You just peel it off. It doesn't hurt anything to take it off or leave it in. Well, if it's too stringy, just peel it off because the stringiness might bother some people when you're eating it, especially a long string like that. But a little string like this probably isn't going to matter. Peeling it off also is no big deal. There are two things peeling off the outer part of your rhubarb does. If you have older fibrous rhubarb, then you probably do want to peel off the outer edges because that will be the most fibrous part. But in general, with regular rhubarb that's not too old and fibrous, peeling off the outer part is simply going to remove some of that color. Now, of course, if you're growing the green Victoria rhubarb, there's no color to peel off, so you don't have to worry about that. But in general, I find that I only have to peel off a very small amount of stringiness. And by the way, a sharper knife reduces the need for that. I need to get a sharper knife on my list of to-do. Hearing that nice crisp sound when you cut is a really good sign that your rhubarb is fresh and in the best condition for preserving. Cutting through the smaller ones, 4 or 5 at a time, can speed up the process. Okay, so the easiest way to preserve rhubarb, and actually the best way, is to freeze it. So what I do is lay out my cut pieces on some paper parchment on cookie sheets, single layer, and I'm going to put them in the freezer this way for a little while so they freeze singly. That way, once I transfer them to bags and I go to take some out later to cook, I can actually remove some from a bag without having them all stick together in a clump. So as you can see, the red is mixed in with the green and will all be cooked together when I use them for whatever I use them for. These that I freeze like this, I usually use for pie because there's nothing as delicious as a rhubarb pie or a strawberry rhubarb pie. Now I've got these set apart in a bowl because I'm actually going to make these into a rhubarb sauce. It only takes 10 or 15 minutes, and all I'm going to add to this 1 pound of rhubarb is 1/4 of a cup of water and 1/3 of a cup of sugar. And I'm going to cook it down, like I said, for 10 or 15 minutes and then put it in a jar and pop it in the freezer. And that makes an amazing rhubarb sauce for ice cream or my favorite, cheesecake. Now, if you really want to preserve the absolute best texture as well as some of that rosy color, then you will need to blanch your rhubarb after you've cut them up and before you freeze them, which, is super easy. Blanching just means putting it in boiling water for 1 minute and then take it immediately off the heat, drain it, and put the rhubarb into a cold ice bath of water. Let it sit in that ice bath for 2 minutes. That will completely stop the cooking and cool them down, and then you can proceed to put them in the freezer. This is going to give you rhubarb that tastes absolutely fresh right out of the freezer. Now, if you're just going to be making jam later with the rhubarb or even a pie, I have not found really any difference in just fresh freezing them without the blanching. But if you're going to be doing anything where the texture of the rhubarb is super important to you, then I do suggest blanching them before freezing. But again, super easy process. Now I'm going to make one thing with some of the rhubarb. I'm going to make some rhubarb sauce. I found this is really good on cheesecake and or ice cream. And it also tastes scrumptious on pancakes. Now this is about as easy as you can get. You're going to take your cut up rhubarb, whether fresh or frozen, and you're going to put it in a pot with some water and sugar and let it simmer down to a sauce. So the proportions are 2 pounds of rhubarb, 1/2 cup of water, and 2/3 cup of sugar. However, you can always make it sweeter or less sweet depending on the taste of your rhubarb and your own personal taste. So you're going to be bringing this to a boil on medium-high, getting the sugar to melt down and blend in. Once it comes to a boil, you're going to turn it down to medium-low and let it simmer for 10 to 15 minutes until your rhubarb has broken way down and is super soft. Basically, the consistency you want it in your sauce. And it is amazing how much rhubarb breaks down as you cook it. When it's done cooking and you've got it to the desired consistency and softness, at that point you can taste test again and decide whether you want to add a little more sugar or not, or maybe it's too thick and you want to add a little bit of water. You can adapt it a bit at that point. Now, some people really interested in, I guess, the aesthetics of it, want to have it look really red, and unless you're growing one of the varieties, by the way, I remember the other variety, it's crimson rhubarb. Anyway, unless you're growing one of those super red varieties, your sauce will be a light greenish red color, not a deep red. If you want that deep red, some people add food coloring. I would highly suggest not, since food coloring is so artificial, but I do have an alternative for you. And that is if you grow Malabar spinach, which grows very easily in all sorts of climates. Not only are you going to get spinach out of it, but you get these red berries. Once the plant goes to seed, you get these beautiful red berries, which are pretty much tasteless. Really, I've never detected any kind of taste in it. However, makes a fabulous dye. So you can dye all kinds of things with it, whether it be a drink or, say, a rhubarb sauce you want to look really red. You could totally do that with Malabar spinach berry juice. All right, turning this down now, and we'll be back in 12 to 15 minutes to see what this looks like. Well, this is nice and thick now after just 12 minutes, and the few chunks you can see are actually very, very soft and mush right down when I touch them with the spoon. So this is basically the consistency I want. If you didn't want to see any chunks at all, you could either mash them with like a potato masher, or just let it cook a little longer. Just be careful you have it down really low at this point because you don't want it to stick. And yes, it's super thick. And that is not because I've added any thickening agent. It's not necessary at all and would detract from the taste, actually. Now I'm going to place the sauce in a couple of jars, and I can either keep them in the fridge for up to a week if we're going to use them this week, or I can pop them in the freezer where they'll be great for about 6 months. Now, something I didn't mention before, but that's super great, is that you can fresh rhubarb, just rhubarb and a little sugar. You don't even need water, because when you macerate the rhubarb with the sugar, which just means soaking the rhubarb in the sugar for an hour or two, which not only releases the natural flavors of the rhubarb, it also releases the juice of the rhubarb. And so you end up canning the rhubarb in its own juice. And canning it takes a half a cup of sugar for each quart of rhubarb. Now, if you didn't know, rhubarb as a vegetable is so acidic that it doesn't need to be pressure canned. You can simply use a water bath, which is the only kind of canning I do, and I find it works great, and it's so simple. So a pint or a quart of fresh rhubarb, water bath canned, takes 15 minutes, and then you can enjoy that fresh rhubarb all year round. However, these don't need water bath canning because one's going in the freezer and one is going to go in the fridge for this week because I'm definitely going to make a cheesecake for one. The other one I'll probably actually save for a few months in the freezer and make a couple of cheesecakes for it the next time my adult kids come to visit late this summer or early fall. Really pleased with how these came out. They taste really wonderful because, of course I had to taste test them. So this time around, I got 12 cups of fresh rhubarb frozen, as well as these 2 jars of sauces, just out of that one harvest that you saw me do. And of course, I harvested a lot more throughout the spring. And I have to say that rhubarb has been one of the absolute best things I've added to my perennial garden, and I highly suggest you do the same. Rhubarb sauce is a lot easier to make than rhubarb pie, and it's much faster. I don't know. I might be making a lot more of this. I was thinking, to put it on cheesecake, but again, cheesecake takes a long time to make. Ice cream, you just take it right out of the container. It's like instant gratification with this sauce. I'll tell you what, rhubarb is definitely the easiest of all my vegetables and fruit to preserve. So simple and so quick, both to harvest and to clean up and pack up in your freezer or however you're going to do it. Even the cooking is super easy and fast. So I appreciate you joining me today, and I certainly hope you learned a little something about rhubarb, and I definitely hope that if you're not growing it already, you choose to do so now. No matter what zone you're in, I think you can have great success with it, and you also can have great success preserving it and using it in your baked goods and for some amazing desserts. I don't think I can recommend rhubarb enough. You really have to try it, and if you've had it before alone and you're not really a fan of sour type fruits, well, then you just add strawberries to it, and that is such a winning combination. I don't think any way you couldn't like that. All right, back to my ice cream. See you later, guys. Mmm.